The difference between Foles and Wentz is night and day. Foles is a much better quarterback than Carson Wentz. Last season, um, the season's all but over. It's a division rival, NFC Dallas versus Philadelphia. It's our record 6-6. Dallas at that point's in first place. Carson Wentz lost that game. At that point, we're 6-7. And Carson Wentz went down with another season-ending injury. It's the second season-ending injury in 3 years. He also got hurt in college. He's injury-prone. We went up against L.A. The bookies had us as a 13-point line against, and Nick Foles and the Philadelphia Eagles dominated L.A., dominated golf. It was something like 30-13 in the fourth quarter, and then L.A. put a couple points on the board. But, I mean, Philadelphia dominated that game. Then Nick Foles and then Philadelphia Eagles went into Texas and won that game. And then they beat Washington, ended up getting into the playoffs, and then beat Chicago, one of the best defenses last year, and then had a very good game against New Orleans and lost by one possession. Nick Foles had the same players around him as Carson Wentz. Nick Foles started the season, and he started 1-1. He beat Atlanta. He also beat, and then he lost to Tampa Bay. Fitzpatrick was the backup, but he had a quarterback rating that day of 130 something, and we just lost by one possession. And I mean, it doesn't matter who your quarterback is. If they have a quarterback rating of 130 something, then they're likely to win the game, and that's what happened. Carson Wentz does not have a good record against plus 500 teams. Last season, he was below 500 plus 500 teams. The season before, he was 2-2 against plus 500 teams. And then we'll call the LA game. The game was tied. He got hurt against LA 2 seasons ago. Nick Foles came in and we won the game. But we'll say 3-2. We'll give him a win for that one because the team did win the game. But that year we lost to Kansas City. We also lost to Seattle. They were the 2 plus 500 teams that we played that we lost to. And then we beat Dallas. We beat Carolina by 3 points that year. And we also will give Carson Wentz the win for that. He got hurt. The game was about tied. And then Nick Foles came in with the Philadelphia Eagles, won the game. We all know how that went. Nick Foles and the Philadelphia Eagles ended up clinching home field advantage and then going on to win the Super Bowl. But, I mean, if you look at last season, first off, Nick Foles' stats are better than Carson Wentz. He has a better quarterback rating than Carson Wentz. He has the same players around him as last season. When Wentz is in, we're 5-5 basically. We're 6-6, but Carson Wentz starting, we're 5-5. The season's on the line against Dallas, and you sit there. The season's on the line. You're playing Dallas, your division rival. It's a must-win game, and you lost. And now we're 6-7. Wentz wasn't going to go in and beat L.A. He just wasn't. And he had the same players around him as Nick Foles. Wentz wasn't going to go in there after beating L.A. and then beat Texas. It just wasn't going to happen. If you look at last season, he was 5-6. He had the same players around him as Nick Foles. He spends too long in the pocket. He doesn't like to check it down. And he's the first 2 out of 3 seasons he's gone down with a season-ending injury. He also got hurt in college. In his first season, he was 7-9. Also, the jump from his first season to his second season to his third season, when he was 12-2, Carson Wentz, his quarterback rating was 101. The following season, where he ended up 5-6, going down with another season-ending injury, his quarterback rating was 102, and from a second-year quarterback to a third-year quarterback, that's not a significant jump. That's not on the learning progression. Your first year to your second year, you're like a sponge. You're taking it all in. You're gonna make a jump, and he did. His second to third year, the progression was not that much. It wasn't that great. 101 to 102 is a reasonable progression, but it's not jumping off the charts. Also, his win-loss record against plus 500 teams is sub 500. Also, the same players that he had surrounding him surrounded Nick Foles, and they showed up with vastly different win-loss records. Nick Foles beat Atlanta lost to Tampa Bay. Then he beats LA, one of the toughest teams, ended up in the Super Bowl, dominated them, beats Texas, that was, if not first place in the division, close to it. And then he beat Washington. So we get back in the playoffs, wild card. And we sit there, goes into Chicago, dominates that game, and then the went up against New Orleans and lost by one possession. He played a good game. Carson Wentz, the season that everybody makes something, this was his great season. He was 12-2. However, he was 8-0 against a lot of fluff teams. He had 2 wins over New York, 2 wins over San Francisco. 2 years ago, they were terrible. Arizona, again, 2 years ago, they were terrible. Washington, they were worse 2 years ago. So he had a lot of cream puff wins. And then his plus 500 record against plus 500 teams, his record against plus 500 teams, Wentz that is, was 3-2, which was okay. But his losses to Seattle, also his loss to Kansas City, he got by Carolina. Last year he lost to Carolina after blowing a big lead. And he lost to Seattle badly. And then we're sitting here, and you know the game was about tied when he went down. He went down against L.A. with the season-ending injury, but we'll give him credit for that. Went 3-2, but last year he was sub 500 against plus 500 teams and had an overall record of 5-6, and he had the same players surrounding him as Nick Foles, and they showed up with vastly different results. His 5-6 and below 500 against plus 500 teams is not good. Also, a quarterback progression from 101 to 102 is not significant enough for a second to third year quarterback where we're talking this much about him, especially when he's gone down with season-ending injuries 2 out of the first 3 seasons. And he was also hurt in college. So a scout would say very injury prone. I mean, that's significant. Also, the fact that he had the same players surrounding him as Foles and ended up with vastly different results and doesn't have as good as stats as Nick Foles is indicative of a problem. Nick Foles ended up at Jacksonville, $88 million contract. He's a starter. God bless him. They're going to have good success. They're going to have a guy with a solid track record who's a solid teammate. An article came out in Philadelphia where it was just shown that a lot of the players, based on what was said in the article, preferred Nick Foles over Carson Wentz. That he was first off, teammates like winning. He won more. But he was also, based on the article, preferred by his teammates. So in Jacksonville, he's a starting quarterback. I think it was a 4-year contract, $88 million. God bless him, what he did for this city. We won a Super Bowl, our first Super Bowl. The season's over. He comes in last year. He beats up on LA, beats up in Texas. We end up back in the playoffs, and then he beats one of the best defenses, Chicago, with a good Eagles team. And this, the same thing happened the year before. They said, no way will we get through Minnesota. They had the best ranked defense, and I think it was something like 38-7. I mean, we blew them out. So I'm happy for Nick Foles. He's going to succeed. They have a person with the track record, with good stats, who's got a track record both in regular seasons and also in the playoffs, and also just a good teammate and someone that you can get behind that people like. What I'm saying with the difference between Foles and Wentz is this. Foles is a much better quarterback than Carson Wentz. The stats are better. The win-loss record is better. And the numbers don't lie. If the stats are better, then that's indicative of a better player. When you combine that with your win-loss being better, when you're surrounded by the same players that Carson Wentz is, and his record against plus 500 team is significantly better, then you have a clear case that Nick Foles is a better quarterback than Carson Wentz. The difference between Foles and Wentz is night and day. And this next season, there's pressure on Carson Wentz. He needs to show up with the amount of hype that's backing him up, the amount of hype that surrounds him. He needs to show up with the results on the field, both in terms of the stats and in terms of win-loss, and particularly against plus 500 teams. He needs to show up with a playoff berth and then at least one win in the playoffs. So 3 seasons is enough time. Your progression from the first year to second year was solid. Your second year to third year was not significant. A rating of 101 to 102 is not significant. It's an improvement, but not by much. And also, your win-loss record didn't show up. You were 5-6 with the games you had with Philadelphia. You went down with another season-ending injury. And most importantly, when the season was on the line and we were 6-6, remember, Foles had 2 wins in the beginning of the season. The fact is we lost the game. And had Carson Wentz continued and had not get hurt, based on that track record, you can't tell me that he was going to beat L.A., Texas, Washington, and then go into Chicago and win. It's just not what was showing up on the football field. And with the same players surrounding him as Carson Wentz had, Nick Foles showed up with all those wins, and it was a very close game against New Orleans. So the difference between Foles and Wentz is night and day, and you're going to see that going forward. And it's important this season for Carson Wentz to back the talk up, to back the hype up. You saw a lot of talk surrounding him, but the results on the football field don't match the hype. This season, 4th season, is enough time. You need to show up this season with the stats, the win-loss record, particularly against plus 500 teams. You need a playoff berth, and you need at least one win in the playoffs for the hype to match what's on the football field. As far as Nick Foles, like I said, God bless him. They've got a quarterback in Nick Foles who's a good teammate. Everyone likes. He's a guy it's easy to get behind. He had tremendous success in Philadelphia. He got us a Super Bowl. And it's just his stats are there. His track record is there. And it's nice to see someone like Nick Foles who's, thank God for him. He's for our first Super Bowl. It's nice to see him get a starting job that is, $88 million contract where he's in a good position to succeed. But the difference between Foles and Wentz is night and day. Foles is a much better quarterback than Carson Wentz.